I think I've got about 5 top tips, if I remember them all.
Yeah.
So, I guess top tip number 1 would be
Hello everyone, welcome to Cambridge from the Inside. We're here with Marcus, and we're going to do a very quick, shorter podcast on top tips for interviews. So I think the emails have been sent out for this year, or will be sent out by the time this podcast comes out, for students who will be having their Cambridge interviews, and we're here to just provide some top tips from our Director of Admissions, Marcus. So, Marcus, what would be your top tips for upcoming applicants who are going to have like a Cambridge interview?
I think I've got about 5 top tips, if I remember them all.
Yeah.
So, I guess top tip number 1 would be yourself in the interviews, right? So sometimes I think people get a bit anxious about the interviews because they think we're looking for a particular personality type or something like that, and they think they have to kind of pretend to be that sort of person during the interview. They just don't need to do that at all. So all they need to do is just be themselves as much as possible during the interviews, and that's absolutely fine as far as we're concerned. So, if someone's interviewed and if naturally they're a little bit shy, that's absolutely fine. If they're interviewed and naturally they're quite sort of talkative and quite sort of noisy, that's absolutely fine. We don't care what they're wearing. We don't care what kind of jewelry they've got on. We don't care about those things at all. So I think people should just hopefully be able to relax, be themselves as much as possible, and that should reduce the anxiety levels so that they can hopefully respond to the questions in ways that are really effective and that really demonstrate how much they know about this subject.
So just understanding what you're saying clearly. So I guess like beneath the phrase "be yourself" is we're also telling applicants that they should believe in themselves, and that believe in who they are is more than enough to do well in the interview.
100%. As I say, they don't need to pretend that they're a particular type of person. They just need to be themselves as fully as they can, and that will put them in the best possible position to demonstrate what they're capable of.
Yeah, because I guess like in any, whether it's an interview or job interviews or exams or literally any walk of life, once you believe in yourself, you're not worrying about whether you're able to do it or not. You can just focus on the task at hand. Even whether that's faking it till you make it or you have a genuine deep belief in yourself, I think there's something to be said for both things. So your second tip here that I have is expect the unexpected. Could you explain a bit more about that for us?
Yeah, so expect the unexpected. What I really mean by that is that in the interviews, the interviewers will not only ask you about topics and ideas and theories that you've already considered. There will be an element of that. Often the interviews will start by drawing upon things that you've been studying at school. But fairly soon after that, the interviewers will want you to consider things that you haven't considered before. You can't know in advance exactly what they will want you to consider. The whole point is they will try and pick something that they're pretty confident no one who's applied has considered in huge detail before. And so, if you're the sort of person who likes to prepare 100% for the things that you do, whether it's exams or whether it's interviews and things like that, that can make you feel a bit uneasy because you can't prepare 100% when you don't know exactly what they're going to ask you about. But what you can do is expect the unexpected. You can go into the interview thinking, perhaps more than once during this interview, they will ask me about something I haven't considered before, but which is closely related to things that I have considered before. And I think if you go into it expecting that to happen, again, it can help keep you a bit more relaxed, so you're not suddenly really disconcerted when they ask you to consider a particular idea or theory or whatever it is. You're kind of expecting them to ask you to do something you haven't done before. So you've still got to think about it. You still need to respond. It might still require careful thought, but hopefully you won't be really disconcerted by that. You'll think, okay, this is the bit where they move me beyond what I've been doing at school and ask me to consider something that's relatively new, as far as I'm concerned. So that's really what lies behind the idea of expect the unexpected.
Yeah, I guess you're more likely to be able to be calm and stay calm if you're going into it knowing that they're going to ask you things that are unexpected.
Yep, exactly.
And the next one here that you have is think carefully before answering. Can you expand on that for us?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've interviewed for a large number of subjects over many years, and I would say when people underperform in the interview, it's most often because they start answering the question before they've thought in enough detail about the question, whether it's an interview on the arts and humanities side or whether it's a science interview. Often there will be questions that have kind of subtle elements underlying them. So the question might seem straightforward initially, but if you just pause for a few seconds and think about it in a bit of detail, you think, okay, there are inbuilt assumptions in that question. There are things that if I'm not careful, I'm going to fail to address that I really should address because they're important. So if you just take just a few seconds, just think about the question, think about the assumptions that are inherent in the question. Think about, on the science side, for instance, how it might relate to particular scientific theories that you have studied. And if you think about the sort of theoretical framework associated with those theories, it might just give you enough time to think, okay, I see that this is more subtle than it appeared at first. And that means that your initial response is already going to be more convincing than perhaps a rather superficial initial response. So just taking the time and having the confidence to think before you start speaking and responding to the question, that can really improve the quality of your responses in an interview considerably.
Just wanted to pick on that because you said to have the confidence to think before answering immediately, and that would suggest that it requires like a lot of confidence, and so applicants should have the confidence and self-belief that they don't need to say something immediately, that they can pause and digest the question and take their time and say something that they genuinely believe and genuinely think is right, rather than, I don't know, it's quite tempting to go into that need or satisfying that needs, that the interviewer needs something from you, so you have to say something.
That's right. I mean, again, sort of relating to this point, what I would say is that silence isn't a bad thing in the interviews. I mean, if the whole interview is silent, then that's maybe a bad thing because there needs to be some discussion at some point. But if someone asks a question, if you just pause and you could even say, let me just take a moment to think about that. And again, that requires a bit of confidence to say that. But if you do that, you buy yourself just a few seconds to think it through and gather your thoughts before you reply. And as I say, in my experience, that usually increases the quality of the response, in some cases quite considerably.
I mean, even in the podcast and normal conversations, if you're uncertain about something, you like pause for a moment, and then once you've gathered your thoughts, you'll respond.
Yeah.
So however, the fourth tip you have here is thinking out loud, or to think out loud. And I guess this highlights the slight difference between pausing to think and just not saying anything. So can you expand on us about what you mean by thinking out loud?
Yeah. So again, these two tips are sort of related, I guess, because they're all to do with sort of thinking in the interviews. If in an interview you've been asked a question, and if it's not immediately clear to you how you should respond, as I said a second ago, it's good to buy a little bit of time, and think about it before you start responding. But if you're just not certain how you should address that issue, how you should respond to that question, if you just continue to sort of sit in silence, and if you just don't say anything, then it's really hard for the interviewers to help you. Because as we've said in other podcasts, the interviewers are really on your side. They want you to do as well as you can possibly do. And if something is unclear to you, they really are keen to try and clarify that so that you can make progress with the discussion. But if you just sit there in silence because you're not sure how to begin, then it's difficult for them to help. So that's really what I mean with the sort of top tip of be willing to think aloud in the interview. So if you're deliberating about whether one particular approach or a different approach, which one is best, you're not sure whether to do X or sure whether to do Y, talk about that. Say, okay, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure whether it's best to respond to it in this way or in that way. The advantages of this way are blah, 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 but the disadvantages of that way are these things, whereas the advantages of the other one are these, and and just talk it through. It's a sort of verbal equivalent of showing your workings, which is what people tend to say for like maths problems, show your workings. If you've got a maths question, some equation that you're trying to manipulate, and if you literally write nothing, then the person assessing it doesn't know whether you're on the right track and you just made a small error or something, or whether you just didn't know where to start. Whereas if you start showing your workings, they might say, well, you got 98% of this right and you got the sign wrong at the end, but who cares? That's trivial, and if you had more time you'd have fixed that. So showing your workings is a way of enabling the interviewers to see how you are making progress with the question, and then, as I say, it makes it easier for them to help you.
Yeah, so I guess so is there something to be said about even if you're like kind of talking to yourself, like there's it's not the worst idea to like think out loud, even if you're not necessarily talking to the interviewer.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think these days, most people have phones and stuff, easily accessible. Pick a question or get a friend or a teacher to send you some questions to think about, and record yourself talking about it on your phone, because as soon as you press record, on your phone, you're probably going to be slightly more anxious anyway. Whenever people record themselves, they always get a little bit more stressed. So that's a good way of recreating to an extent what it will be like in the interview, and just see how coherently you explain your thinking about that question. And when you play it back, you'll probably be pretty well placed to determine whether it was really coherent or whether you were unclear at times. And that's a good way of practicing in advance.
That's a really good idea. Making voice notes on your responses, whether it's to articles or going through a science question, is a very good. I would highly recommend that, because you do just you're practicing the interview. Definitely. I think we're showing that that in the interview there's kind of two things, like two aims that are happening. One, you want to be able to solve the problems and answer the questions, but secondly, you also want to communicate well with the interviewer. So it's not just about one or the other. Like and this kind of like thinking out loud, showing the interviewer where your head's at and where your thinking is and what kind of approaches you're taking, are good communication skills, and is showing the interviewer that you'd be very teachable.
That's right. Again, as we've said in other podcasts, the interviews try to recreate the small group teaching environment that's just a standard part of how the teaching at Cambridge works. We call them supervisions. That's partly what the interviews are trying to do. And so if you're able to sort of communicate well and explain your thought process in relation to a complex topic, that reassures the interviewers that, this is someone who'd really benefit from that supervision teaching framework. As I say, regardless of which course you do, whether it's arts, humanities, sciences, social sciences, all the students here have supervisions.
Yeah.
So it's there for every single subject, and so we just need to be as confident as we can that the students to whom we offer the places are really going to benefit from that quite distinctive way of teaching.
Yeah, because I guess say if you're struggling, like, and I guess by yourself you're struggling with the problems, but you were very good at communicating with the interviewer and showing what parts you were struggling with, and then with a little bit of their help, you could show that you were then very good at solving the rest of the problem yourself.
Exactly.
That's a very good.
Exactly. And of course, one of the fundamental things that's so important to any type of learning is knowing what you don't know.
Yeah.
Being really clear about what you don't know.
Yeah.
It's often the case that people aren't always particularly clear about what they don't know, or maybe they try to bluff, that they know things that they don't actually know. So most teachers really appreciate it when students are just very, very clear about the things they're confident with and the things that they're not confident with, and that's creates a good environment for learning.
Yeah, because it's really interesting, because in that situation is actually their ability to ask for help and their communication skills that makes it a very good interview, rather than their like competence, as it were.
Right.
Which I think it's something that applicants might have not considered, because I think a lot of people think it's the smarter you are, that's all that it takes.
They often think they just have to get the right answers instantaneously, and if they don't, it's a disastrous interview, and that's not how we look at it at all.
At all, yeah. And the last thing you have is try to enjoy it.
Yeah, this sounds like crazy talk, but but I think it's important. I mean, the interviews are an opportunity to talk to world-leading experts about a range of issues that hopefully everyone involved in the interviews is to some extent interested in. That's a really great opportunity, and of course I understand why that might be slightly intimidating in some ways, why it might be something that makes applicants feel a bit nervous. Of course I get all of that, but I think the more people can just try to relax and try to enjoy it and find it a really satisfying experience, the greater their chances are of impressing us. And for the reasons we've already touched on, someone who really sort of engages with the discussion and really seems to enjoy learning in that kind of environment, that reassures us that they would stand a great chance of thriving if we made them an offer. So in enjoying the process of discovery is something that we're trying to sort of glimpse in the interviews, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think like it's challenging, and it might be challenging in a way like something they've never done before, but it's but then it's also, because it's challenging and it's something new, it's also an opportunity, like a new opportunity to do something you've never done before. And I think there'll be some people who will relish that straight away, and they won't need us to encourage them to enjoy it. And I think for some others, there's a real opportunity for them to surprise themselves if they meet the challenge head on, and they just give it 100%. And then looking back, they think, oh, that actually, that wasn't as bad as I initially thought.
Yeah,
I guess
that's right. That's right.
I think like most people remember their interviews one way or another, so like it is a real opportunity to give it 100% and see what happens.
And it's not unusual at the end of the interviews for the interviewees to say, they're often astonished that the time has passed so quickly. Like interviews are regularly about sort of, 25 minutes long, maybe 30 minutes long. It always feels like it goes in about 4 or 5 minutes. It goes so fast. And it's not unusual at the end, for interviewees to say, oh, that was fun, right? So again, they're not necessarily saying they thought it went well or badly. In a sense, they've stopped worrying about that. And they're focused on something that perhaps in some ways is more important, the fact that it was an enjoyable experience, So I think as people prepare for the interviews, if they can do anything to try and get themselves into the state of mind where they stand a chance of enjoying it, again, that's just likely to to increase their chances of doing really well in the interviews.
Nice. I think last I just wanted to add, just to demystify this like sense of belief that or feeling that the interviews are the be all or end all. There are lots of people who didn't get in the first time, didn't get an offer, and decided to reapply, and then subsequently got in, and they never really remember those interviews where they didn't get the offer. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's not like a binary situation.
Right.
Like it's not like the world definitely does not end.
No,
but I think applicants will feel like that.
Yep.
And there are like living proof, like individuals who, they had like a long think about it afterwards and decided to reapply, and some of those got in. I mean, I myself is one of those people. And I think the point I'm trying to make is that I'm not saying, oh, with this information, you should think, oh, well, if I don't get in, it's fine, I can just reapply. That's not the point. The point I'm trying to make is that you should go into these interviews thinking that there are potential, if the outcome that you want does not happen, there are other pathways that you can take.
That's right.
And then it should take the pressure off. It's not like this is not like your only opportunity to do this thing, and if you don't succeed, it's a complete failure.
That's right.
And I think I think that's a feeling that probably every applicant has when they approach their interviews. And if you have that pressure off your shoulders, you feel much more relaxed, and then much more likely to have like a nice interview.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. And of course, again, we've mentioned it on previous podcasts, but worth just saying it again. The other way to sort of take the pressure off the interviews a little bit is to remember that we don't only look at the interviews.
Yeah, exactly.
Again, by the time it gets to this stage in the process, and the interviews are, the last remaining step for the applicants, they sometimes think, well, I've got to get this right, because if the interviews, don't go brilliantly, then I haven't got a chance. When we make our decisions, we look at everything. We don't only look at the interviews. We look at, performance in an admissions assessment, if there was one for your subject. We look at written work that's been submitted. We look at all aspects of the application, and the interviews are just one part of that. So again, I think reminding yourself about that, if you're applying, is a good way, again, just to remove some of the pressure. The interview isn't the only thing that counts. You've already shown us in various ways what you're capable of, and we wouldn't be interviewing you if we didn't think you had real, potential and ability. So the interviews are just one part of a process, and if it helps to think about that, because it takes the pressure off the interviews, then it's really wise to remind yourself of that.
Yeah, exactly. Nice. Was there anything else?
Don't think so. Sounds like plenty.
Sounds like plenty. Well, if you do have an interview coming up, good luck, and we do hope you enjoy them.
Yep.
Nice.
It's okay, I think.